welcome to another episode of What You Need to Know, a Canadian Polycast. I'm Alyson Fair, consultant here at Bluesky Strategy Group, and as always, I have the pleasure of being joined by my colleagues. This week we have Mike Blanchfield, Jeff Turner, and Neil Brody. Hello, everyone.
Morning.
Frosty morning in Ottawa.
Yes, it is. So I want to talk to you guys this week about two things. The first thing is critical minerals in Canada, and the second is on a permanent hybrid parliament. Mike, I'm going to start with you first on the critical minerals. This week we had the head of the International Energy Association in Ottawa for a fireside chat with our Natural Resources Minister. You had the chance of being there and attending. He says, the IEA head says that we have resources, we have the law, we have the close considerations of social and environmental issues to be a leader in critical minerals in Canada. Do we? What was your big, like, what do you agree with him when you heard that?
Well, there's a lot of, obviously that's an open question of discussion, and, I'm not sure whether I agree or disagree, but it certainly raises a question. But one of the points that he also made that was really interesting in terms of where Canada can position itself was to be an international leader, to go forth and preach this and to sort of help build this friend-shoring coalition that we need. He talked about how, we had the first big energy crisis of the 70s, and, and now we're having another bigger energy crisis that is basically the result of Russia being the top net exporter when the war started in Ukraine. And so what he said was, we don't want to see this movie again as we move to clean energy and developing critical minerals. We need to secure our markets and our supply chains. So it's go forth Canada, preach the mantra of, you've got this vast land with all of this stuff, whether we've got the capability of harvesting it economically and environmentally. And, we need to bring on partners like India and Australia and others to sort of create this market for this important energy resource of the future.
So before I get to Jeff and Neil, quickly, what was the minister's reaction to the comments?
The minister seemed fine with all of it. I mean, he threw a couple of olive branches, I think, at the oil and gas industry. He basically said, we're going to need oil and gas during this transition. We know this, but hearing him say that, and also the fact that the oil and gas industry is doing good work on moving towards clean energy and partnering with indigenous communities as well. So it was pretty amicable, and Wilkinson also basically tried to downplay the friction between provinces and Western provinces, apparently Alberta and Saskatchewan especially, and Ottawa. He said he had good working relationships, and he was trying to speak constructively about trying to move all of this forward, or give that impression.
The head of the IEA said also that industries here in Canada also have a clear lack of a diversification, and then that's actually what's holding us back in becoming this critical minerals leader. Jeff, I want to ask you, you have a lot of experience with our clients in this area. How do we change that? How do we get our industries diversified?
Well, I think, let me just ping off a few things Mike said as well, too. Like, we have, for the first time in a while, the political almost consensus, at least around critical minerals. I think arguably you can say critical minerals list, to your question, is actually quite a wide list. It's actually, there's 30 odd number on there right now. It could get bigger, and it goes all the way from steel to rare earth elements. I mean, it's a very big list. And so in the broader mining economy and sector should also benefit from that streamlining and from that general emphasis for the first time in a long time from government on that policy. So the political consensus is there. Second thing, I picked up from something Mike said was that the law was there. And so Bill C-69, that created the Impact Assessment Agency for all of its controversy, is in place. I heard just yesterday in a speech by a minister that at the Canadian Club, who was reinforcing that Bill C-69 was the framework that we were all working from, and that they were proud of it, even despite all that criticism, that it did the right thing. And that gets me to a third point, which is, I mean, here's the challenge that most of these natural resources proponents and operators are facing is really permitting. And I mean, I think that's what you hear throughout, throughout time, but also throughout, sort of the common investments, community. That permitting is really one of the things that can hold up investment or that can cause uncertainty. Because, and even as government officials acknowledge, it takes 10 years or more to actually get a mine from conception to operation. So it's a good thing that we're focusing on trying to change that. Last point I want to make, though, is of course that's in tension with environment and Indigenous obligations, and I think that's where the rubber meets the road on this sort of intention on both sides. And not to say that they're mutually exclusive or that you can't do a project with all of those good things. It's that government and regulators often have to rely on process, right, to get through thorny issues and input. And so their way of dealing with that is more process, which is in direct opposition to accelerating things. They put a bunch of money in the system, so we'll see how that shakes out in terms of improving that process. That's the low-hanging fruit available to them. But I think that's the kind of full spread you see in terms of trying to get that critical mineral economy and the broader resources economy moving quickly.
Neil, so what's our big takeaway from all of this? Are we putting ourselves in the right spots to become a leader in critical minerals?
Well, that would be up to, as Jeff said, the permitting authorities. I think the gentleman from the IEA mentioned something around 20 years to get a mine stood up in Canada. By that time, other jurisdictions have mines stood up and will be a last entry into the ecosystem. So it really requires political will. I think there's some there, but the rubber will have to hit the road in the next couple of months, I think, in order to be a first mover on this. The one thing I would like to focus on that was brought up was the gentleman from the IEA applauded Canada for its environmental governance, its political governance, its corporate governance as a stable, strong place in which to do business, a trusted trader in this sector. And coming from the IEA, that's a great stamp of approval. I would also extrapolate that to our oil and gas sector, because as the Minister Wilkinson said, even post 2025, there's a role for oil and gas in the world economy. And where better to buy your oil and gas from than Canadian producers who are doing it environmentally, ethically, under good corporate governance and under good government. So I think that can't be lost in this focus on critical minerals. As there's another separate resource stream here that benefits from the exact same positives that the IEA focused on about doing business in Canada.
Yeah, great news for all those industries. Hearing that from him. I want to switch paths here and talk about Parliament, because this was the first week back after the Christmas or the holiday break, and they actually decided, based on a parliamentary committee, that they're looking at keeping the hybrid parliament permanent. The three of you, I'll start. Neil's already shaking his head. I know what his answer is going to be. I want to ask each of you, is this good, bad, and why? Mike, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Mostly good. There are problems. And I think if it does come to pass, there'll have to be an accountability mechanism put in place. Can't be like Treasury Board mandating public servants to be in their offices 40 to 60% of the time, but there'll have to be a transparency, like spending and the stuff that we keep an eye on. And so we will know who's there and who is not. I don't think it's inherently a bad idea to allow MPs to spend more time in the ridings closer to the people that they represent. It keeps them in touch. It shakes this Ottawa bubble mentality. It makes them happier. I mean, let's face it, politics, an MP that lives within driving distance of Ottawa has got a much different life than MPs that have to fly back and forth across the country. They do work hard, whether we like them or not, or criticize them for what they do or say. And while they're here in person, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. They behave badly. I mean, they waste time. I mean, the question period that you see on CPAC is not what's going on in the House when you're looking down, looking at MPs, reading. And it's not just being rude and obnoxious to each other and arguing. They're ignoring people. They're reading. They're doing other work. They've got, they're bringing in their electronic devices. you know, and they argue and heckle, and sometimes they do it in good-natured ways, just for fun, just because they can, because they're there. It's a way. It's not efficient. I mean,
to get the soundbite from journalists who we used to watch and get that.
yeah,
little
and
soundbite.
the thing is, you know what? It's a bit of a cliche, but it's behavior that no university teacher tolerates in their classroom. No high school teacher wants to see. Yet this is what they do. And it's also the other thing too is we're going to be facing the next disaster, the next disruption, the next pandemic, whatever it is, and it's inevitable. We're going to need a mechanism in place to keep things functioning. So it's not a bad idea to have that. Again, subject to accountability. I mean, it doesn't have to, the next time this happens, and it will, sorry, don't want to be the Cassandra here, but you know, it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be like March 13th, 2020, when we all, you know, when we all found ourselves sitting at home, hunched over laptops, our kids gorging on Netflix, and all wondering whether or not we were going to have enough toilet paper for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Jeff.
Also, yeah, maybe I can play the bridge. Maybe I can play the bridge here because I think we know where Neil's going to end up. But I have to say, so we've all spent time in parliaments and legislatures, and I think there's no question that those are very hallowed places. Like you walk in, it's a very special feeling. It's to Mike's point, it's a very differently operating workplace than most of them in terms of the ebb and flow of the place. And it's really a privilege to be there for everybody, whether you're elected or an official or a journalist or even just a visitor. So that, you know, I want to bridge to like that is so important, and the classic, you know, parliamentary function that is supposed to have these people face to face, and as Mike pointed out too, like for good reason as well, like to interact and to find compromise and to discuss. And I mean, we've lost so many of those in our kind of modern era, but you know, that's the purpose. And I think that's, you know, I think there's a real strong and proper instinct to try to hold on to that. On the flip side, and this is why I mean, I think unfortunately there's some blurry political partisan lines on this stuff that don't need to be there, but they naturally will be. And I don't fall into one like the liberal camp fully, because I would say where I do support that liberal camp, you know, as it's defined politically, is like there's this exceptional need to be more family friendly. I mean, many members of parliament now have young children or are having kids while they're MPs. I think that just simply wasn't much of the case, you know, in years gone by. Or of course, for the fathers, were not necessary to be home while the mothers looked after the children. And I think that's gone, and we need to support that, and we need to make sure that, you know, members can of course be connected to their constituency and maybe have a sick day. You know, like that kind of thing. So I think there's so many good reasons on both sides. So the answer to me has to be hybrid, but we have to be cautious and judicious about not losing some of those really core parliamentary functions. I don't know all the answers, but I think those are the values we've got to hold on to.
Neil, last word to you on this.
I'll try to keep it to less than 2 hours. First and foremost, to echo Mike's point, I don't know how the government can tell public servants they must come back to the office while members of parliament are able to do their job remotely anytime they want. But separate and aside from that, this is a complete departure from our Westminster style of government that we've had in this country for over 150 years. The job description of an MP is to get elected by the people in your community to come to the House of Commons and represent them. From 2006 to 2011, I lived through two minority parliaments where MPs had to be in Ottawa all the time to preserve the function of being the government. If travel restrictions were heavy, you had to have people in Ottawa to protect from a vote from the other side that may topple the government. That's the quote unquote punishment of being a minority parliament, is the government has to have all of their MPs in Ottawa within walking distance of the House of Commons to survive as government. If you're allowing government MPs to go anywhere and do anything and be able to vote from Winnipeg or Regina or Whitehorse, all lovely places, but that's not where your place of work is. Your place of work is in Ottawa, on Parliament Hill, in the House of Commons. And getting away from that does away with one of the great checks on government in this country, which is you must survive a vote in the House of Commons. If the House of Commons is everywhere, then no government will ever fall, and that's great for the current government. But the the tide will change at some point, and then I suspect other parties that are in opposition may want to topple a different government, but be hamstrung by virtual rules. So I think it's a disservice to our style of government, which keeps MPs in Ottawa. I mean, that's the job. You sign up for a job. The job's in Ottawa, and if you don't want that job, don't run. That may sound harsh, but that's the reality of the job of an MP.
Right. We got a lot of nodding heads. I think we all agree it's good, it's bad. As we all
No, it's just bad.
It's
just bad. It's just bad.
So Mike, Jeff, and Neil, thank you so much for this great conversation as always. And thank you to you, the viewers, for watching. We hope you will join us next time. Take care.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.
Bluesky Strategy Group is one of Canada's leading public affairs firms. For government relations, lobbying, and strategic communications advice across Canada, visit us at blueskystrategygroup.com. Bluesky Strategy Group is a proud member of the Global Communications Alliance.